Poetry and the Call to New Life. I'm going to present a very well-known poem that came entirely unbidden to my mind when I thought about that idea of poetry and the call to new life. Like no doubt many people kind enough to listen to me, I've known this poem since my school days, and I'm well aware that it continues to be a school poem. The internet is full of recordings of lessons in which teachers seek to explicate it. Yet it remains always fresh for me. I've recited it to myself many times in the last month, and found in it an appropriateness that I had not suspected before, even though I've always liked it. The poem is The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The land's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outlent, his crypt the cloudy canopy, the wind his death lament. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken, hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in a full-hearted evensong of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, in blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things, afar or nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good-night air some blessed hope, whereof he knew, and I was unaware. I thought of this poem in the past as typifying the mood of the time when it was written, 1900. The image in the poem of the land's sharp features as the century's corpse outlent, I thought of specifically in relation to the 19th century, ended when the poem was written. And surely that is the first layer of meaning. When it was first printed in the Graphic magazine on the 29th of December 1900, it had a title which tied it firmly to the time of its writing, By the Century's Deathbed. But by the time it was published in Poems Past and Present in 1901, it had the title by which we now know it, The Darkling Thrush. With that change of title, and with all those images of the deadness of any winter in the first and second stanzas, it speaks to all times. When we entered the lockdown 6 months ago, in the Northern Hemisphere we had emerged from winter and had the spring and summer to look forward to, with all their encouragement to hope and life. Now we are moving into autumn, and what is in the future is not the burst of reawakening in the natural world, but its shrinking down to something that Eliot might call a little life with dried tubers. Something much more like the landscape described in the first two stanzas of Hardy's poem. Perhaps that is why it came to mind when I was searching for a poem that addresses the theme of the call to new life in a manner appropriate to our current circumstances. We are used to the idea of the renewal of hope with returning life in the natural world in the spring. It's only recently that the paradox of Hardy's poem has been fully brought home to me, the astonishing wonder of the hope against hope expressed in it. First of all, this is not birdsong in spring, but in the dead, yes, the dead of winter, when frost was spectre grey. I am not an expert in these matters, but according to one of the ornithological websites I've looked at recently, one would not expect the thrush to be there at all to sing in these circumstances. For though thrushes generally do not migrate, they will abandon their territory if the winter is severe, as it evidently is in this poem. So this thrush should not be here. And even if it is, then, as I also learned, it's also surprising that it sings, as song thrushes do not usually do this before spring, as famously remarked by Robert Browning in Home Thoughts from Abroad. Finally, it's only during the breeding season in June and July that it's at all likely to sing at night. In all these respects, the song of the thrush in Hardy's poem goes against the normal patterns. If you listen to David Attenborough's tweet of the day on the song thrush, you will hear that all his comments relate to the thrush's contribution to the dawn chorus, which one naturally associates with vigour and delight. Another surprising thing, then, about the voice heard in the Darkling Thrush is that it is not part of this chorus. Instead, it is the singing at nightfall of one solitary, aged thrush. There is astonishment, I think, in the speaker's perception that this is not a song of melancholy, but against all the odds, including the bird's own frailty, a full-hearted evensong of joy illimited. This bird's song implies hope where there is apparently no reason for it. The mood of the eye seems to be reflected in the landscape and surroundings. All is cruelly dead, spectre grey, desolate, fervorless as he is. Even the speaker's posture, I leant, is connected with death by the repetition with difference of the same verb in the second stanza, when the century's corpse is imagined as out-leant in the sharp features of the surrounding land. This speaker is not only fervorless but also sceptical, even in the face of the astonishment of the bird's beautiful, happy good-night air. This speaker is capable of saying only, "I could think," and of imagining only a trembling of hope. The image of tangled vine stems that scored the sky like strings of broken lyres suggests a ruthlessness and wantonness of destruction. Who would break a lyre and use its strings so aggressively to score the sky? Broken lyres also evoke a symbolic association with art. Indeed, we feel today the pain of broken lyres, the stifling of art and song. In many places of worship in the world under pandemic restrictions, singing, that so important form of human expression, is not permitted. Reading the poem in this context, I am somehow inclined to think of the bird as singing on our behalf, as it were, for the poet, by his choice of words, has connected the music of the natural world with human singing, that happy good-night air, singing that also has religious and even liturgical associations, carolings, evensong. I also notice that the form of the poem itself, by its wonderful orchestration of sound, gives the lie to those broken lyres. We find perfect yet unobtrusive and unhackneyed rhymes, such as outlent, lament, birth, earth. We also find inventively subdued ones, such as overhead, illimited, small, soul. And we find bravura combinations of assonance and consonance with alliteration. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, in blast-beruffled plume. I hear music too in the contrast of diphthongs and lingering sibilants with simple vowel sounds and plosives, creating a sense of an opening to infinity against a closing to the sharply finite. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead. There is something in the ancient pulse that, contrary to appearances, the death associations of the first stanza, the physically hopeless condition of the thrush, never dies. There is an energy there that continues in spite of all these signs of death. So the poet takes one of the most energetic of verbs to describe how the thrush had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. There is a kind of abandonment of giving, even of sacrifice in this, an utter forgetfulness of self. Undoubtedly, there is a call in this poem, a voice, and perhaps it might be considered as a call to new life, since it is associated with everything that contrasts with the lifelessness and fervorlessness of the surroundings and of the speaker. The energy of that abandoned flinging, the full-hearted singing, its joy illimited. All of this seems to hint at access to some blessed hope, hope which Hardy has dignified with a capital letter to indicate its significance. This in a poem whose title, as we now know it, reverberates in that word darkling, with echoes of gloom and death, as in Arnold's Dover Beach. We are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. There is wonder in this poem at the mystery of the natural world and at its secret wisdom, which always accompanies us, though perhaps we need to be alone, like the speaker, to feel this fully. Finally, at the risk of being accused of overinterpretation, I would like to offer a reflection on the melodious phrase that describes the character of the thrush's song, joy illimited. By choosing the unusual form, illimited, rather than unlimited, Hardy has made the phrase sound somehow liquid. On the one hand, this is perfectly in keeping with the sound of the bird's song. On the other, it might also perhaps call to mind some words from St. John's Gospel. The song is like a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Even for a disheartened, fervorless listener in surroundings that seem to speak only of death. Thank you. I'd like to conclude by playing a moment or two of the thrush's song. Here it is.